Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Experience. I'm Nora Yolis Young, and today we have Mary Lee LaBay again, who is just so filled with wonderful wisdom about consciousness, about past lives. She's an author of, I think, 5 books, some professional and some for your enjoyment. She's a master trainer of hypnotherapy and her special integrative style and past life regression. And I think, would you say in between lives as well, or how would you put that?
Past lives, between lives, all of that subject.
It's so exciting. So we're talking about consciousness, people, and Mary Lee LaBay is here to help us. So welcome, Mary Lee.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you again, Nora.
Thanks, and very lucky to have you. And so I love talking about consciousness and the awakening that's going on in the planet. And I think you are uniquely positioned because you get a chance to work with people's consciousness in this really deep way. And one of my favorite things about the work that you do is your exploration of past life themes, which is super inspirational to me as a practitioner. And let's just start with talking about maybe how you got into consciousness. How did you get into this work?
Well, I mean, if we want to consider past lives, I guess we could go back for millenniums.
Right.
You know, it's been on my journey for forever. It's a part of my soul. And I'm sure that, you know, a lot of people that are listening to your show can relate to that yearning and that resonance that comes from, you know, the soul purpose, right? So we were just talking a little bit about past lives before the show, and you know, so there's a theme. So you know, early in my life, in this lifetime, I was already thinking about past lives, even though nobody else in the community was talking about it in the mid-50s, right? So it was something that a knowledge that I came in with, and so it became a real pursuit, even as a teenager, with tarot and astrology and meditation and yoga and Eastern philosophies and all of that. And then, you know, just, you know, constantly pursuing that, reading, finding teachers, and then becoming a practitioner myself in the late 80s and 90s. And then, you know, with all that experience and working with other people, gaining even more knowledge about how their consciousness works and how they've put their perspective of the universe together and their memories of other lifetimes and what's happening between lives, and just gathering that from people, as well as like my PhD in psychology and some of my other research and everything. But really, the juicy, wonderful information that I get to have access to comes from my private practice.
I bet.
And my personal experiences going through regressions, talking with my spirit guides, working, you know, with entities and things.
So you came in kind of awake, would you say?
Yeah, I would say, and I don't think I really understood it or understood what that was early on. You know, the more I know, the more I look back and go, oh, I already knew that, or I was already inspired by that. Of course, the learning goes on and the skills keep getting developed, but I'll go back into past lives and find skills that I had there that I still haven't been able to access in this lifetime. You know, so going back and trying to remember them, and I do this with my clients as well, is have them access the lifetime where they could do that, whether it's musical talent or artistic or writing or herbs or healing techniques or whatever, to go and to really experience what that is, and then take note of what is being activated, what are they accessing when they're doing that, if they're doing shamanic work or psychic work or healing work, healing on different subtle bodies, that sort of thing. How are they accessing that? And so we can recapture that.
That is so powerful. So you've been doing this for a long time. And you've talked about your individual journey and going into past lives. Do you feel like you need to have someone guide you into past lives, or do you do your work individually, or how do you personally explore as a hypnotherapist?
I do a combination of things. Sometimes I work with other people, usually people that I've trained, because I respect my techniques and my approach, and it's hard as a well-seasoned trainer to have somebody work on you and be doing some awkward awkward thing. Why did they ask me that, or why are we going in this direction? So I'll either work with a former student. I have made recordings, and so I'll listen to my own recordings and guide myself. And then I also will do them spontaneously. So we were talking about my trip to Ireland. I also had a trip to Tucson where I did this. But the trip to Ireland, for instance, it was really just sitting in the location and allowing the memories to flow. And, it's not all that easy sometimes. Your mind can get in the way, or your disbelief or things, but just really relaxing into it and picking up on subtle cues and then developing that and letting that kind of blossom out into the story and the memories.
That's so beautiful. So I'm really fascinated by the experience that people have in that kind of embodied awareness. And so I know I've had my own experiences with remembering, and I like the term remembering, like you're like remembering, like putting it back together,
Right.
experiences. And so I'm curious for you, what does that feel like when you have access to an experience, a past life that was you, that you had no previous awareness of, and then all of a sudden it comes into your awareness? What does that feel like for you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it depends. I think it depends on what lifetime you're accessing, for one thing. So for me, it's sort of a subtle awareness, and then, a following of the thread, and then maybe it kind of bursts open. So for instance, we were at Malahide Castle, just north of Dublin, and I'd been walking around and just trying to collect memories, and it wasn't necessarily coming. That was like, okay, there's familiarity. I think I've been here in many lifetimes, but I don't know in what capacity. And so then finally I found a bench where I could just really relax, not walking, not having to keep myself upright, all of that. And I sat on the bench and I just looked at the castle. And then suddenly I realized that I had a sister who lived here, who was married to the,
Some royal dude.
to the guy who had the house, to the family. It was the Talbot family. And so she was here, and then all of a sudden I realized I was there, and I was very pregnant, and they had brought me here to the castle to stay with my sister and another sister who was a healer. And because he was off, protecting the country, doing whatever he did. And, he wanted me, and I wanted me, surrounded with people who could support me in that pregnancy. I wouldn't have to do housework, whatever. So, I would be well cared for, and my sisters would be there. And one was a really talented healer. And so I thought, okay, here I am. And kind of the life and the lifestyle, like, oh, we had all these intellectual games, and we would, the girls would talk about all sorts of spiritual things, and we would have, you're spinning and you're having visions, and, we were definitely into that. It was very intellectual, astronomy and different pursuits that we would have, chess games. It was an educated family.
Mm-hmm.
But then suddenly I see myself kind of laying down and I'm delivering the baby. And the sister that lived there is like off my left leg and my healing sister off my right leg. And I'm just, getting ready to deliver. And all of a sudden I just went whoosh, like this. And I'm just up in the air looking down at my body and the blood and my sisters. And I knew that I had died in childbirth. The baby lived, but it was just weird because, it wouldn't be something I would make up. Even being pregnant, any of that, I wouldn't have made that up. But specifically this feeling of I was just like on a helium balloon. I just went like this and could see the whole room from way up above and just see my body there. And so, my conscious mind here was thinking, well, how do I feel about that? What are my emotions? And it was interesting, because here I am leaving my baby, my family, my body, my life. And it was interesting because I was really calm. It was just like, oh, that happened, and I knew the baby would be fine and they would take care of him. And it was a boy. And I was just observing, and it was like, oh, wow. Okay. I didn't expect that, but the lifting off was really, I'm glad I had that experience because it's another experience. I wouldn't have known, people can describe that, but when you're in the past life and you're actually experiencing some of these things, that's really rich. I know now what it feels like to go, to lift up off the body like that.
Right. And don't you feel like when you have that experience, it can sort of imbue more meaning into your perception, say, about dying, and how often I notice this in my own life a lot, just how we project our feelings and expectations onto others and situations and think that they're a certain way because we're interpreting it in a certain way. And then to have an experience that is directive in that way, like, okay, I'm observing myself, experiencing myself lift out as a soul out of that incarnation, out of that life, and I'm totally fine with it. So you told that story and you said the blood and the sisters, and I'm already projecting emotion. Like, oh my God, that's so horrible, right? Right? And you're like, I'm cool with it. And so that's the perfect, to me, that is quintessentially why hypnotherapy and exploring the broader soul perspective is so important, because we get the real interpretation through our own lens, through our own soul lens, if you will.
Well, and this is how wisdom is created and developed in ourselves, and I'm of that age now that I'm a crone, but it's important that we go through a lot of experiences for ourselves so that we have that wisdom later in life.
Yeah.
Not every death experience is going to be like that. Certainly if you're in the middle of of something really terrifying, or, some other situation, or if you're simply not that well balanced in yourself. I have been aware of people who've died, people I know in this lifetime who've died, like one girl who died in a car accident, and she just couldn't believe she was dead. So she just kept walking around trying to figure out why people couldn't talk to her. And she was panicking and just, screaming about what was happening, and she'd be in trouble because the car got wrecked, and it's like, calm down, girl,
Yeah. Did you work with her?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
I worked with people who jumped off the building, off of the tower during 9/11. And to calm them down so that they could prepare to reincarnate. Because so many people died at once, it was flooding on the other side. It was too much. All the spirit guides and everything were just, it would be like being in a hospital trying to manage all these people coming in, and they were coming over to the other side. So several of us,
Fascinating.
just took a hold of some of these people who were freaking out because they were going to have to be kind of shoved into new bodies. It's like, you're going to be that baby,
It's
but
like damage control.
right. And you don't want to do that while they're still in trauma. Imagine just, here's your baby and an hour ago they were in a fiery inferno and now they're your baby dealing with trauma, right? So we had to calm them down and get them to have a whole different experience before they were ready to incarnate. So we did work with several of the victims there.
And how did you do that? Was that through a person, just direct mediumship?
Yeah, just direct experience.
Yeah.
That, I don't know, we can divert into that conversation for a minute, I think,
Yeah.
because it was really valuable for me. One of the people that I worked with had jumped. He was a man and he stood there and he knew he had to jump. It was just flames. He was going to perish in that incredible heat or jump, right? And he was traumatized because, in that moment, he thinks, this is going to be really painful. I'm going to, go down dozens and dozens of floors and smash, and it's just going to be so painful. But what happens is that's not really what happens. But at any rate, so I talked to him and I said, hold my hand. We know it happens. We know that this is the choice you made. So now let's stand here and we're going to do it again. And so it was sort of like desensitizing. So, he's standing at the edge, freaking out. And I said, no, I'll hold your hand. We're going to do this together. So we jumped and then we came back up and I said, no, we're going to do it again. But now realize you'd never felt the pain. And he realized I didn't feel the pain. I was gone before the body hit. And I said, okay, well, knowing that and knowing that this is an extraordinary experience for your consciousness, right? Nobody wishes that on anyone. But if it's going to happen, why not be present consciously?
Wow.
Why not take in that whole experience to grok it, if you know the term. Yeah, to totally grok what that is, to jump off the 35th floor of a building, in a fiery inferno, and let's do it again. And so we did it. And I said, let's just enjoy the hell out of this because it's the last experience of this. And we jumped. And as we were jumping, he just lifted off the body and the body fell and he was fine. And he realized that. And so we were able to, just through some of that and some conversation, we were able to take him from traumatized and freaking out to, disappointed. Okay, I'm leaving my family behind. I had a great career. I'm leaving that behind, but I'm okay. Totally having a different experience about it. And then he was fine.
Well, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
So then there's another, so then there was a second part to this story. So a couple years later, we were in New Zealand and I had always wanted to do a parachute jump from an airplane, right? Like since I was 18 and realized that was a thing.
You're
and
a brave woman.
I was already in my 50s and it was like, okay, I want to do this. Well, in New Zealand on the South Island, everything is an adrenaline rush. You can jump off anything. They have the bungee jumping and they have the gliders, the hang gliders, and they have air, parachutes and everything. So, whatever kind of adrenaline you want, you can get it. And so one day my husband did a parachute jump and I wanted to, but I wasn't quite in the mental frame that day because we had already done some other adrenaline stuff. And I just said, I'll do it a different day. So he did it and I was so excited. And so a few days later, we had checked into a bed and breakfast and we had driven by a place where we could do the jump, or I could do the jump. And we checked into the bed and breakfast and I said, oh, I want to do a jump, a parachute jump and all this, thinking, tomorrow or something, right? And we're unpacking And she comes and she hands me the phone and she said, they can take you at 6 o'clock. And I'm like, oh, you mean right now? And you know, it was sort of like, okay, this is it. You're going to go up there and you're jumping out of an airplane, right?
Good for
And
you for being spontaneous.
yeah, well, so, you know, I was trying to wrap my head around, okay, we're really going to do this like in an hour. We had to just like get in the car and go. And as I was preparing for it, I really looked back at this experience with this man that jumped off the tower, because I thought, how arrogant of me to stand there with him going, oh, we can be brave, you know, we can do this. You know, it wasn't my life, right? And I thought, you know, here it is on the top of my list of things to do, my bucket list. And, you know, maybe I need to put my life on the line like he did. And of course, it's much safer than jumping off a tower where, you know, there is no remedy, you know, no safeguards at all.
Right.
But I thought, if he can do that and I can be brave for him, then I'm going to do this for him.
Aww.
And so the whole jump, you know, flying, we had to go 45 minutes getting to elevation, and we get way up here, and then looking, and you know, the sheep were smaller than the whites on my fingernails. I mean, there's way down there. We're above the cloud level. And we jump out of this plane, and it was the most magnificent thing. It was awesome. But I dedicated that whole jump to him. I mean, we're connected. Yeah. But anyway, so that was.
Did you feel him with you?
I'm sorry.
Did you?
I can't say that, because I know that he had incarnated. Because part of the reason to get him prepared was he would be in a body. So I don't think he was with me, but it was for my sake, you know, and because we know that time is not chronological. Once I did that, I had always done that. So then when I'm standing there next to him, I will have already done it, because
right,
you know,
right, it's in the collective.
They're all there. So yeah, so it was
great.
It was great.
Well, and it sort of speaks to the natural balance that we experience in life too. You were, as a practitioner, putting yourself out there to help in this way that was much more intuitive than, you know, like, you know, you just went with it. Like, this is a healing opportunity. Let's try this. And you went with it. And then later on, you're able to look at it in a new way, but incorporate even more healing. Like, it wasn't just healing on his soul level, it was yours too. And that's just beautiful.
Yes, exactly. We both got to benefit from the whole thing.
Wow.
And so many people get, you know, as a practitioner, I think it's really important to do our own work and to also strengthen ourselves in places where we're weak. Yeah. I noticed, you know, there are students that come through the training and they're like, oh, you know, I can work with anybody, but not if they've been raped. Like, you know, I wouldn't be able to handle it, or, you know, or whatever, some kind of situation where that freaks them out too much. And it's like, well, then that's where you need to go get your work done, because if there's anything that would create that kind of a response for you, that's going to debilitate you as the therapist. What are you going to do? You know, somebody comes in, say, for weight loss, and suddenly they're talking to you about their rape and they want to process, and you're going to go, okay, well, we're done for today. I'm going to refer you out. That's not professional.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we do our work. And, you know, something like somebody traumatically dying or dying at all, I talk to a lot of people in the new age, whether they're healers or psychics or, you know, regressionists or whatever, and they'll say, oh, and I told them, just go to the light, go to the light, go to the light. And it's like, it's all light out there. That's like, you know, being in a floodlight and going, go to the light. It's like everywhere you look is light. It's not useful. And what does it mean anyway? You know, I mean, a big giant demon could be full of light.
Like this little spotlight.
Yeah, and you could just go there. You know, I mean, it's like, that is a useless thing to tell anybody. So it's more important to help them to process and to be aware of what their experience truly is, rather than the practitioner panicking and just go to the light, go to the light. Right?
So that, I mean, so for people who may be experiencing that, who are watching this, or maybe new to who are awakening, who have had maybe near-death experiences, have had past life experiences, anything where that pertains to what they're doing, what is the personal Mary Lee LaBay treatment? What do you say to them about processing? Instead of going to the light, you would say,
oh, well, I would just say, what are you experiencing? And if the person is experiencing trauma, we have tools where we can help them, just like I did with him, sensitizing him and just staying with him in it and processing and becoming aware. When somebody comes to me and they say, it's the last straw, I'm so traumatized and this is the worst thing that ever happened to me in my whole life, instead of me freaking out and going, oh my God, how can I make it better? I'll just go, wow, that is really interesting. Tell me more. How can we, if you're going to go through this extraordinary experience, this is what strengthens our character. This is what brings us wisdom. And people just want to come in and wipe it out, just like the medical community. Let's just give you some anesthesia, And it's like, no, how can we become more aware? How can we learn from every little detail of this? It's sort of like the person who finds out that finally figures out that they go through serial relationships and they always end poorly and they always pick the wrong guy. Well, it's because instead of really looking at that and figuring out what is it in me that allowed me to choose that and stay there and suffer this, so that I can fix it and I can be different when I approach the next relationship, they'll just go, okay, that's done. I don't want to think about it again. And they just get into the next relationship. Nothing has been fixed. And so the same thing happens in anybody in any kind of issue. If we're not, if we don't delve in there and figure out what exactly is going on and how can you be stronger and wiser and make better choices, then we're going to actually be helping the person. But I stay completely calm if, no matter what's happening. I'll see it in my students. People are watching me do a demo and somebody starts to cry and they're, abreacting and they're going through some extraordinary experience and people in the room are like, oh, or whatever. And they'll look at me and I'm as calm as, if they were telling me they were in the meadow with flowers. It's not my issue to be upset about.
Right. Well, and freaking out is not going to be a good space holding situation.
Right. Yeah. I had somebody did something like that. And then one of the students said, why didn't you start crying? Or why weren't you reacting to that? And then the person I was doing the session on, my demo person, said, if she had done that, I wouldn't have felt like I had any support at all. Yeah. If he's falling apart, then what do I have? Yeah. So they know that when they're in my office, I'm a solid rock. They can't rock my boat and rock all they want. And I'll just keep, holding that space for them and figuring out, how can we get through this and what's the best things that they can be learning.
That's beautiful. Have you ever had somebody I remember once early on, a very sensitive medium person that I was doing a session with was receiving so much healing in his session that it looked like he was convulsing. Wow. Have you seen that before? I didn't freak out either, but I was like, are you okay? Like, I'm checking in. You good? And he's like, yeah, I'm receiving the download, but he was just writhing.
Well, it can happen. It's rare, But even recently, I had somebody who warned me. She said, if I go into trance and I start seeing stuff, I'll, have like spasm kind of muscle things. And she did. I said, that's fine. It's
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just this surge of energy that is coming through and being released
Yeah.
through the limbs. So it has to find its way somewhere.
Yeah.
But I do entity depossessions too, and sometimes that'll happen in that when an entity is leaving or something. So
Oh, that's so fascinating. I think that this type of work really is it's important to have a sense of inner resilience and stability, and to have done the work. I mean, probably a lot like a therapist would have to. And I would imagine too that if people are drawn to it, like if you're drawn to it, you have the capacity to do that and hold space and be ready for anything, because that's really what you'll get. You'll get anything.
right. Exactly. And if you don't have the capacity, then that's part of your skill set. You need to go and seek that.
Yeah.
Not just skills of how to put a person into trance, or what techniques to use once they're there, but also the skill set of being calm in the face of whatever is showing up in the session.
Yeah, yeah, and being a guide, like what's next? Where do we go now? And
Mhm.
and not losing your composure. And it's so beautiful to see people come into their artistry in that way. So, quick question. Maybe it's not quick, but what I think is really interesting is when I look at reports of near-death experiences, they remind me a lot of what people are reporting in session. And so I feel like there's a coming together of those worlds. And I'm just curious if you've thought about that, if you have an opinion about that.
So in session doing just like normal work, or in session doing past life,
Yeah, spirit realm stuff.
spirit realm stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it probably is very similar. I mean, there is a chemical component when you're actually dying
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be in play as well. But yeah, I mean, we can kind of replicate all of that in the session, the death experience, lifting off the body, um, you know, what's happening in between. But I think it's just very important to stay neutral in our language, to stay non-leading. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not saying, do you see your guides now, or do you see a light, or do you see this or that, but more as what do you experience now? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are you noticing?
Mm-hmm.
And let them come up with the information as they can remember it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my mentors is working with somebody in Canada, a cardiac surgeon. They're trying to figure out how to do a study. They're finding that people who have had cardiac events have had near-death experiences. And this is, I think this is more hypothesis than anything else at this point. But I think it's fascinating that we're sort of entering into I think consciousness, uncharted territory, and I love that. I love that that consciousness is getting to the place, I think, with the inclusion of more understanding of quantum physics, and how quantum mechanics work, that consciousness exploration and healing and the implications of that are vast. And so I'm curious about what you think we're heading into. What do you think about our future regarding consciousness and humanity?
Well, I mean, what I'm observing is that I don't know if you would call it a crossroads, but it feels like, a pendulum, but we're kind of coming to both ends of it. Like there are people who are truly trying to wake up. And then there are people who are actively shutting down. They don't want to know anything. They don't, they're just, let me live my life without thinking about anything beyond this small little world that I'm living in. And then there's people who are really working hard to expand that. And then in between, there's a whole bunch of people who think that they are doing it, but that they're only doing it intellectually. And I think that's the difference,
Yes.
the piece that we get to help people with, because you can read all the books you want, and it's like, oh yeah, I know quantum physics works like this, and I know that, if you were to go into a past life, it would be like this, but they've never experienced it for themselves.
Right.
And that's the beauty of actually doing lots and lots of regressions. I mean, I'm aware of probably 50 of my lifetimes, and as we were talking before, it's a wide range of experiences, even though with a common theme and a common purpose. But but knowing it intellectually almost just makes you top heavy. You have to put it down in here. It's like, well, there's difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And wisdom comes from experience.
Mm-hmm.
It combines that knowledge with experience
Mm-hmm.
into making it wise.
Mm-hmm.
And so consciousness, I mean, we have the opportunity right now to raise consciousness, but there's a lot of sway to the other side.
Yeah.
and it's a fight. Consciousness, let me take water. Consciousness is volitional.
Mm-hmm.
We can't, just because we're, just because, just because we're, living and breathing, just because we're reading books does not mean that we're expanding our consciousness. Just because we agree that, people should have their liberties to speak or be with who they want or whatever, and we're open-minded, does not mean that we are evolving our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't actively participate and take in the experiences, and some of them need to be very hard experiences for the rapid growth.
Yeah.
And so if we don't do that, if we don't allow ourselves to actually get our hands dirty and have these experiences, then we're in that knowledge phase, but it's not, the knowledge part will not be carried with you into your future lifetimes.
Wow.
You'll only carry the things that are real, and that's what has actually been embedded in your character.
Oh,
So it's
I
real
love that.
character, yeah. And so if you intellectually go, oh yeah, I think everybody should be treated equally, but in your heart there's still something different, or just, you could pick any.
Yeah, you practice something different, or there's an incongruence.
Right. Or I believe in past lives, but I don't want to have to deal with all of that because my life is too busy now. Well, you're really going to be confined to one life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I hear that a lot. People will say, oh, I just got too much going on, I can't deal with past lives.
Right.
The thing is, when they deal with the past lives, the issues that are happening here all get straightened out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It actually helps rather than hinders, because when we're doing it from one life, it's like we keep trying to reinvent the wheel, and we forget all the knowledge and wisdom and lessons that we learned through going through all those experiences in other lifetimes that we could be using right now. Instead, we're just like, no, I just have to deal with today.
It's really interesting. I agree with you. I see that a lot. I see people who I've noticed recently that there's like a highly developed spiritual aspect that they can access, but then there's this reticence to apply it. So there's that intellectual component that is like, yeah, I mean, that's something that's really exciting to me to contemplate, is like how to create tools for people who have a difficult time dropping in from their intellect into their really into their the wiring that's totally there within them. It's totally there, like you can do it, but then they don't see a need. And it just, I mean, I've actually turned people away recently. I have a coaching client, I won't name any names, but I recently was like, I need you to plug in. I need you to actually be willing to plug in.
Yeah, like this barrier.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's hard to feel and to, especially, really wrenching feelings, but it's so beneficial.
Oh, it's beautiful when you like to get on the other side of an abreaction. Oh my gosh, there's freedom.
Release. Oh, yes, exactly. I mean, even in the Bible, and I'm not like a staunch Christian, but, I've been exposed to things. They talk about throwing yourself on the rock, and it's just like, okay, I'm just going to submit and I'm all in, because if not, you get slammed against it.
Right.
In the power card in tarot, we see it in Uranus in astrology and Pluto, and I mean, the correlations are in lots of different avenues of access here, but if we just keep it all at an arm's length, we're not really living life.
I would totally agree with that. Do you feel, because in some kind of metaphysical new age realms, people, and I personally have my belief about this, but do you feel like the power dynamic is changing with the rise of consciousness in the collective?
What do you mean by that? Like power?
Well, like old power structures, old paradigms falling away?
I would hesitate to say that, because what happens is the more that we gain consciousness or we gain power, what we might call the positive side.
Terms are
term. I kind of hate to say that, but the more we gain consciousness here, the more the unconscious people have to stand their ground and are not happy about that, because it's a reflection of what they're not doing. It's sort of like, this is a bad example, but when you look at somebody who's really physically fit, and it's like, I don't want to stand next to that person because I'm going to look so dumpy, right? But, I mean, that's just a really low level example, but
right, but people can relate to that.
But yeah, right. It's just an everyday experience. But the more that consciousness is developed, there are forces in the spirit world as well as in the physical that do not want that, because the power, they will lose their power. So they're going to strengthen themselves up against it. So it makes it a harder journey, really, to fully allow yourself to have that consciousness. But that's why we want to have community and also protections, not only in the physical, but on the spiritual levels, to have good protections so that we can open that consciousness without that opposition affecting us so badly. I had to go through that for 30 years, for especially the first 10 years or so, without those protections, and really having the full force of that, where there were organized cult groups who were, they would do spells and bad juju energy and all this stuff, because they didn't want me or my people or my. Oh, I'm getting an echo now.
Oh, interesting. You're getting recorded just fine.
Okay.
Well, that's interesting.
So turn your volume down maybe a little bit. I'm turning mine down. Let's see if that helps. That helps. Okay.
Is that better?
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, just there are groups or people who just don't want that consciousness to happen, because they would lose their power over those people, or over their dominion of what's happening in politics or in the physical world.
Yeah. Would you be open to talking more specifically about those experiences?
In what way?
Just because you were talking about being unprotected, and I think, this show is the experience, and I think people who are awakening and learning how to access higher consciousness may not know how to protect themselves properly, and your experience, whatever you feel like sharing, I think would be really important to share.
Okay. Well, I don't want to scare people.
Yeah, I
um,
don't want you to do whatever you feel
yeah.
is right, but I think from the perspective of your evolution as a human being and in the work that you do,
Yeah.
it might be very instructive.
Well, I've been fortunate because I work with people who are more like warriors, and so they are more in charge of the protections, and I've been assigned spiritual guards that also protect. So like there's these layers, and it took, a long decades to get it all put into place.
Wow.
And so symptoms of the attack, I mean, if you're doing the work, you're likely going to be attacked. And so I tell people that that is not an excuse not to do the work.
Right.
If it's happening, then call me and we can talk offline, because I don't like to share a lot of the real work with just out there. We can talk offline for serious people. But if you're, I had a lot of people say, well, you must be doing something wrong because I'm doing all this work, but I'm not being attacked. Well, if you're not really doing the work and you're not really making an impression on the planet or helping people become aware, then you're not really a threat, and you're not going to be attacked. But when you really get out there and you're starting to do the real work, you might start feeling these symptoms. I would have a lot of intense pain in my bones and in my body, a draining of energy, a lethargy, hard to get out of bed, foggy thinking, and you'd have to just push through it as best you can. I have people that come to my office with these symptoms, and we work together more privately on taking this stuff off of them, and then setting the protections in place so that they can have some breathing room to keep studying, keep expanding, and it'll be layer after layer. As they get to a certain place, then that would have to be put into place again. So there's, and when you're around alcoholism, abuse, if you've been abused, if you've done too much alcohol, drugs, had trauma, frightening experiences, too many operations, or going under anesthesia, those are opportunities for entities to come in and get a bit of a foothold. Or if you've played with Ouija boards, different things can really open you up to having that happen. And it's not shameful. It's not even that rare. And, even if it's a temporary possession or something, but, you can really check yourself. And if you have behaviors that don't really seem to be your own, or thoughts, negative thoughts that are coming in that keep battering you down, you're no good, that'll never work out, all this stuff, oftentimes it's just getting that off of you, because it's not really you. It's, it needs to be taken off or protected. You need to be
right. It's a negative influence.
Right. But it's also valuable to have to do the push yourself. So I don't always take that off people right away. It's like, okay, what is the weakness in that person that allows that to happen? That is the opening. What's the foothold where they can get a hook? Is it low self-esteem? Is it self-doubt? Is it anxiety? Is it, being too concerned about the opinions of others? I mean, we can all get into these categories pretty quickly.
Sure.
But what is the weakness that allows them to get hooked in? Loneliness, whatever it is. And then strengthening that from within the client so that we're working for them to come up and be stronger so that they can push it out and seal it up, you know, rather than having to be dependent on somebody else all the time to do that for them.
Absolutely.
So the work is actually, you know, part of their spiritual growth to re-strengthen them, because if they're on that path, they were probably quite strong in other lifetimes, and they're trying to regain their memories. And so accessing that and rebuilding that strength and that ability within them to hold, you know, to seal up the breaches and to hold that off of them.
And then they can hold more light.
Exactly. And then the entities that are bothering them typically stop, because they can't, it's like, oh, that's not a fun game. Let's just go work on somebody who's easier, you know?
Right, right. It's like their vibration changes so much they can't even hold the entity frequency.
Right. They can't get affected by that so much. Yeah.
Very fascinating. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I don't think very many people have talked about that. And it's, I think, on my show, and I think it's important to address it in a way that, you know, has real experience behind it, and that isn't fear mongering, because that is not at all what this show is about. It's about empowerment. This is the way I choose to see my own personal activism in this world, and it's the best job in the world as far as I'm concerned.
It is. It's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I went through a lot of extraordinary experiences, and at the time it was, you know, it kept feeling so defeating. But from where I stand now, I wouldn't trade any of that for anything. Powerful. Because that's what gives me my wisdom, my strength, my power, my actually, you know, my ability to do the work that I do and to help other people. You know, so don't be afraid of it. If you come up against something like that, then sure, we can take care of it, or you can learn about it. And the journey can be difficult, but it's so valuable on the other side of the journey. Just like you said about the trauma, any of the work that we need to do, the ab reactions, the crying, whatever it is, it's so good on the other side, because you've built, you know, in this case, you've built mass into your energetic field and respect on the other side. And you've earned your place in society, in those spiritual worlds, or, you know, as a human being.
You're doing your work. You're not just phoning it in. You're actually showing up and participating in the experience. And it's so fortifying, right? And I think that's often what some of the things that, it's a common thread that I see when people are very hopeless, like they feel like they don't have hope. This is sort of the last thing I'm just going to try, because I'm just feeling like I'd rather just go home. And a lot of people don't consider what might be on the other side of that journey. It just is, it feels so daunting in the moment, that pain, that the storyline of the struggle is so, they're so immersed in it, they're marinating in it to such a huge degree that to imagine beyond it is just sort of something they hadn't even considered. I see that a lot, and I would imagine that's common. And just to have somebody who's like, you know what, there is something right on the other side of that, and how, like, that's instantaneously hopeful.
Yes. It's and you know, you can look at the journey of the caterpillar to the butterfly, right? You know, suddenly, you know, everything is fine. I feel really good, but now I need to go build a cocoon, and this is really scary. And once they're in the cocoon, they dissolve into liquid. I mean, they just, you know, complete transformation. Imagine that journey, and you're just hanging there vulnerable. And then, you know, you start to reform as this entire different creature. And then even when they come out of the cocoon, their wings don't work for about 2 or 3 days. They're just like totally vulnerable. And then suddenly they're these beautiful butterflies. And, once you're the butterfly, you don't look back and go, gosh, I wish I'd never gone through the cocoon, you know, and all that scary stuff that, you had to go through, but it is so valuable. It's so valuable. And it's the only way that you come to a real next level in your spiritual journey, is to just submit to that, whatever that difficult cocoon phase is, so that and the ability to achieve that next level, right?
I agree 100%. And we're gonna start winding down, but I thank you for bringing up the cocoon metaphor, because that being in that state of cocoon, I think, is really where a lot of people are, and it feels incredibly vulnerable, and humanity doesn't do particularly well with uncertainty. And so it's like, I got to know what the answer, what's the outcome. And I guess the only real outcome we could say is it's going to be better on the other side. Just hang in there.
Absolutely. And there's no answer to what the outcome is going to be, because who I am now is not anybody I could have imagined before I did the cocoon.
Right. Right. The true breadth and depth of who you are can only happen in that complete surrender, right? Which is also a very difficult concept for humanity.
It's terrible.
What? You want me to what?
Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's worth it. I applaud anybody who is willing to just dive in and do it. And I would say that if they need help, or they just want to touch base with somebody who's been through it, obviously they can call you. They can call me if in the certain areas where I have that strength. I would be happy to work with people. I do it all the time. I work with people and hold that space and that wisdom for them to go through this.
Oh yeah, I mean, people, like, if you need Mary Lee LaBay and she's saying contact her, do it. I mean, what else you need? You have a personal invitation, and I will put your contact information in the description box below the video so people can do that. But she has books, so you can read her books. They're fantastic. If you're a practitioner, I teach, and I use her her past life regression for practitioners book for our trainings. Mm-hmm. She's got resources out there, people. So, and if you have questions and you want to either communicate with me or Mary Lee LaBay, just write them in the comments below, or contact her, contact me, but get in the flow of it. There are resources, and we're here for you. We're here as you surrender to your awakening.
Yes. Yes. It's glorious. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, and there's a whole team. I think one thing that you had mentioned earlier before we finish, and I just wanted to bring that up, when you were talking about sort of the darker days when you were going through the hard stuff, and you had a team of warriors around you, and that's the piece I want to bring up, is that look around to your community, and if you don't have, like, if you're in a place where there's no one that you can talk to about it, know that there are people you can talk to online. Of course, you can talk to me or Mary Lee, but don't assume that there's no resources out there, because there are people that can provide any aspect of your tribe. They can be the warrior energy. They can be the uplifting, light etheric energy. There are people who are incarnated, who are here in all of these different supportive roles for you and your journey. And I just recommend you go out looking for those connections, because it's a beautiful way to be in the world. And there's so much deliciousness to be had in an engagement with people who are going through their awakening process too. And you guys can support each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. So do you want to share information about your upcoming training?
Well, I do have a training coming up, and To keep it evergreen, I would say that there are trainings about twice a year. I do have one coming up this October in 2019. The early bird registration goes till September 20th, and then it's full tuition, but, and we only take up to 12 people. We keep it a boutique training. It's going to be full hypnotherapy certification and past life regression specialist. And then next year I'll be offering it again, but my rates right now have been the same for 10 years. And next year, that's all going to change. So now would be a good time to jump in. And you can go to my website, maryleelabay.com, and take a look at my calendar, take a look at upcoming trainings, get a lot of more information, get my contact, call me or whatever, and we can connect if you're interested. So thank you.
Awesome. Do it, people. And honestly, if you have any interest in changing your career, it's a wonderful time to become a hypnotherapist and past life regression specialist, because people are needing this work, and they are looking for highly trained, sensitive, skilled practitioners. So if you feel a calling, check it out, And if you're on the West Coast, Mary Lee LaBay is, she's in Washington. So,
yeah, people, this next coming training, people are coming in from 5 different states. They're flying
awesome.
in here for the training because it's 6 consecutive days. Sometimes I do it over weekends, and then every so often I do it consecutive so people can fly in, so they don't have to come on the weekends. So right now, if you're coming in from out of state, this would be the time, and we could maybe even hook you up with a roommate if you wanted. So.
Oh, good to know. So the community is just growing, and so if you feel so called, please do. But Mary Lee, thank you so much for being on my show. I love your wisdom. I love how you are in the world, and I'm going to have you on the show a lot. So stay tuned, everybody. Oh, wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's been awesome as usual, and I'll look forward to the next time. That'll be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, just enjoy your journey and love your experience of life, and take care. All right.